Welcome back, everybody. I'm Neal Romanek. I'm the editorial director of the Flint, and we're going to take a different turn here. We're starting to talk about education and training and what we do with all the great engineering information that we have. And I'll be, I think, introducing a more right brain perspective, I think, to things. This will be the first time in SCTE history that a presentation has featured a clip from Conan the Barbarian. So you have that to look forward to. But yeah, I said I'm editorial director of the Flint. I'll just give you a very brief overview of the Flint. There we go. The Flint is a new publication. We started about a year ago. We cover sustainability in the media and entertainment space, from script to distribution, the whole big giant elephant. And that came about because we found there were a lot of silos, a lot of people reinventing the wheel on sustainability in our industry, a lot of people not really having a lot of good information about best practice, a lot of people making guesses and assumptions. I worked, and my background is as a writer and editor for multiple industry publications, usually around media tech. So I'm the one that you tell all your stories to, and I squint at you and try to understand what you're saying. And every so often I go, aha, I got it. And then my eyes glaze over again, and I try to understand more what you're saying, and try to interpret that for people who are maybe outside the technology space, and who can hopefully use that information to make good decisions. We started with Neal over there, who's our publisher. Started just about a year ago. We have a website. We do multiple things. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But first, the riddle of steel and why tech won't solve climate change. Has anybody seen Conan the Barbarian? Sweet. Okay. We're gonna kick off with this. Okay. This is. If you haven't seen the movie kicks off with Conan's dad, that's Conan's dad, making a sword with his wife. They make a sword together out of steel. It's a title sequence. Really great music by Basil Palladores. Amazing. And then, having made this amazing bit of technology, he has a little chat with his son, the young Conan. So look.
Fire and wind come from the sky, from the gods of the sky. But Crum is your god. Crum, and he lives in the earth. Once giants lived in the earth, Conan. And in the darkness of chaos, they fooled Crum. And they took from him the enigma of steel. Crum was angered, and he was shook. And fire and wind struck down these giants, and they threw their bodies into the waters. And in their rage, the gods forgot the secret of steel and left it on the battlefield. And we who found it are just men. Not gods, not giants, just men. And the secret of steel has always carried with it a mystery. You must learn its riddle, Conan. You must learn its discipline. For no one in this world can you trust. Not men, not women, not beasts. This you can trust.
Right. So Conan's dad there talking about steel and talking about technology. And going to the next slide. Myths. So we create myths around technology. That is Conan's dad explaining to Conan why we have steel and why steel is amazing, and our people's relationship to steel and our people's relationship to technology, and this is how it all happens. It's really cool. It's a really cool story. And we need myths to help us understand the world. We need those stories to help us understand how to operate in the world and operate with the stuff around us every day. But we can also get blinded by the myths that we have and that we kind of take on board. Those keep us from solving problems, and they keep us from looking facts in the face, and they keep us from finding solutions to climate change. And the things that we run into, these are some of the myths that we love, and some of the things that keep us from solving problems. So we have the myth of technology. This is the myth that technology will solve our problem. If we just let technology do its thing, technology will take care of it somehow. That there's this thing in technology that will just automatically tend towards the good, or will tend towards solving problems. And that does not seem to be true. In 1987, I believe, James Hansen appeared in front of the US Congress, told everybody about climate change, explained how it all works, explained how greenhouse gases heat up the atmosphere. We had loads and loads and loads of time for technology to just gradually change things to the point where we would be off fossil fuels. We wouldn't have the climate change issues that we're now starting to experience. Would have been super easy. If technology just works automatically, you would have thought that the markets and everything would have just taken care of that. Didn't happen. Margaret Thatcher, a year later, did her own climate change speech, where she was a physicist, actually. She trained in physics, and really understood the science behind this. She did a whole speech about climate change. It's going to be a thing we all have to face. We all have to get together. Businesses have to mobilize. And I'm sure somebody gave her a call and was like, shut up, I'm because you didn't hear too much about it after that. And nothing happened. So it's decades later, nothing automatically happened. Technology didn't come to the rescue. Progress didn't come to the rescue. The markets didn't come to the rescue. And we can fall into these ideas of myth of technology, myth of the market, myth of progress, that there are these things in place that are going to solve the problem for us. I think as engineers, most people here are about problem solving. That's kind of what you do. It's like, here's an impossible thing, I bet you can't solve it, and then engineers go, I bet I can, and they go and solve it, and find a way to solve it. But it's a natural human reaction that we use to avoid responsibility to rely on these myths. There's a principle that's well understood in emergency management called milling. And when people are hit with major disaster, and I'm sure you've seen this yourself, there's a fire alarm or there's a hurricane, if there's a fire alarm, people don't run to the door. If there's a fire alarm here now, I will bet you money we will not all run to the door. What we'll do is we'll just kind of look at each other and kind of go, is that a real fire alarm? Should we do it? Yeah. And it's a really well understood phenomenon. It's why you find a lot of people in major disasters just dead in their house, because they will kind of just wait for something. We wait for something to happen. And we can't wait for stuff to happen when it comes to climate change, when it comes to fixing these problems. We have to take responsibility. So responsibility is the opposite of these things. Opposite of relying on myths, opposite of relying on something else is going to solve the problem. And it's taking responsibility and problem solving. The historian Timothy Snyder, who some of you might be familiar with, he talks a lot about Ukraine and all kinds of other stuff. But he's put forward these two concepts, which are really useful in thinking about this and thinking about how we change and how we change things and how and why we don't change things. And there are two types of politics, he says. And not just like politics, but just politics in terms of how we deal with the world and how we solve problems. And one is the politics of inevitability. The other one is the politics of eternity. And the politics of inevitability is this stuff. The politics of inevitability says, if I'm a Marxist, that eventually, the history moves forward, and we go through the stages of capitalism, and then eventually socialism happens, and it's magically fixed, and we have a socialist utopia. That's just how history works. If I'm a Marxist, that's what I think. Or if I'm a capitalist, I think, capitalism will solve the problem, or whatever. It's this idea that certain things are inevitable. Or if, democracy automatically happens. People love freedom, so people are naturally going to create freedom because that's the way we head. And it's this inevitability that we believe certain things will happen. We have that myth in the back of our heads about climate change and solving climate change, that eventually something will somehow happen. What happens that doesn't happen? We get depressed, very sad. we realize those dreams, those myths, are not true, and we flip over to that other state, which is the politics of eternity, and that is where nothing matters. You're caught in a loop forever. Everything I do is going to be the same, no matter what I do. It's always going to turn out the same. Those people are always going to be mean to me. This is always going to happen, and you get stuck in that loop. So the politics of responsibility, being responsible, is where solutions happen. So let's get out of that problem and get into some solutions. So solution, people being creative with really good facts. And that is what I think a lot of people here are used to, and where we need to be when we approach climate change. So we've got to get out of that idea that something else is going to solve the problem. We were joking actually just before I came up here. I was sitting down there, and my slide was up there, and we were just kind of looking at my slide, and I'm like, oh, I guess that's me. I'm supposed to go up and present. So I can't just sit here and watch somebody else do my talk. I've got to go up and do it. Which is a pain in the ass, I tell you. But, I've got to do it. I have to stand up and do it. And it's very, very hard to do things by yourself. So I know I'm the only one in this room who's tried to lose weight. But when I try to do that, when I try to change my life, when I try to any number of things, if I do it by myself, it's hard. When I do it with other people, it gets easier. It seems to get easier and easier the more I bring more people into it, for me. And so if we have groups of people operating with really good information and acting responsibly, we can create some really great change. So at Flint, that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to create this place where people can come together, exchange really good information in the media industries, creative industries generally. Our I would say specialty, but where we've come out of is broadcast primarily, but the creative industries, and trying to get people together from different silos to share their ideas and to share their enthusiasm, to share their vision for how to solve some of these problems. We do it so in the practical sense. We have a website, we do a weekly newsletter, we have a monthly podcast, a monthly webinar, and we do some special projects. The response has been really great. I invite you all to sign up to the newsletter. But our job is to listen to the industry to find out what the conversations are and to try to kind of coax out sustainability opportunities and sustainability stories. So we say everybody has a sustainability story. So if you're like, you don't know what your sustainability story is, don't worry, you have one. Just by waking up in the morning, you have a sustainability story. And we seem to be pretty good at, and have a pretty good antenna at sort of finding what those are and bringing those into the conversation. So we invite you to be part of that. Special projects, we have this past summer at the IBC show, we've done a few things. A cool thing that happened, actually it started last IBC, where we're having a conversation with over a beer, and I think it was only a beer in Amsterdam, a beer and stuff in Amsterdam, thinking about the travel to trade shows. Everybody's flying into trade shows, and it's this kind of crazy thing of everybody flies in for a weekend and then flies out again. And it actually come from thinking about, I had worked for BAFTA Albert. Some of you may know about Albert's the sustainability arm of BAFTA. Had a lot of, really helped out the UK industry in terms of sustainability. I had worked there, and we'd had this conversation about what do we do about these big events, like the BAFTAs and these big glamorous events. People have to fly in, fly out. It's crazy. There must be a better way. And that had got me thinking. We sat around, Neal, Howman, and Dom over there, and some other people at IBC, and thought, well, maybe we could if there's one way to get everybody out of a plane and to the IBC show, together in a different way. So we thought, well, hire a train, we'll hire a Eurostar. So we did what we call the Flint Green Line. The Flint Green Line is a Eurostar carriage. It's essentially a party on a Eurostar carriage. We had some sponsors in, they did presentations, we did some other cool stuff. We did a pub quiz, we had a jazz band. Dom, raise your hand. Dom and his jazz band, literally on the carriage. It was awesome. And I think we've got a video. So yeah, it was pretty great. And we're looking at doing something next year as well, probably expanded. There's been a lot of interest. And again, it's that idea of just getting people together and getting people active, getting people engaged, even if they don't know, they may not be able to tell you what their carbon footprint is, or they may not be able to tell you the latest thing that data centers are doing. But it's they bring their own expertise, whatever area of expertise they have, bring it together, have conversations, form friendships, form partnerships, and that creates change. We are also doing a couple other things coming up, which are of interest. We're working right now on our first of our region specials, which is going to be on the Nordics. The Flint is going to be publishing a series of focuses on specific geographic regions that will look at sustainability and the creative industries in those areas. So we're looking at the Nordics now. That's Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Sweden, Norway, the Faroe Islands. And after that, we'll probably be doing Canada in a few months' timelines. We're still working out on that. And then we're also going to be doing a focus on circular economy coming up fairly soon as well. And these will be published materials that you'll be able to access on our website. So there's that. And yeah, join us at the Flint. And yeah, set aside the myth that something else is going to take care of it. It's you. That's you're going to do it. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Make it easy for them. Then we can have a full Q&A with all of you.
Hi folks, so my name's Don Robinson, and I'm the founder of an organisation called Greening of Streaming. I've also been working with streaming technology since the very early 90s, so I professed as a webcaster for 15 years and then built the first content delivery network here in the UK, a CDN, and today I still run a software company which delivers technology into the live streaming and live content delivery space. So you can get about as geeky as you want and technical as you want, and unfortunately for those of you who are non-technical, Greening of Streaming is always going to be slightly technically leaning in its conversations. So a little bit of a background. This is our membership. We're primarily formed of vendors and technology providers and operators who deliver services into the streaming space. So we sit slightly above the cable industry. We speak IP together, and so we interoperate a lot, and we rely on your networks as operators to get a lot of the content through the networks to the end users. But we aren't specifically wed to any particular telecoms protocol, so we sit very much in the IP and above, IP space and above, but we're very interested in what's going on in the operator space, and any opportunity to speak to operators and telcos about participation in what we're doing is hugely valuable, because it is a big black box that we're trying to dig into and understand how streaming services affect the deployment, strategic deployment, and the energy use that relates to that deployment within the cable networks. We have an affiliate membership group, and definitely keen to try to invite Scotty to. I never know whether to say Scotty or SCTE, so I'm sorry. So I've corrected that. SCTE. We'd very much like to invite SCTE to become affiliate members if that's something you'd consider. Essentially, it's just a reciprocation of a point of contact between the organisations to help develop your thinking about sustainability from our perspective, and also help gain some understanding, hopefully your side, and understanding of what your activities are as well. So this is the scope of the challenge. This diagram never comes out very well, but it is my London tube map. I've given this diagram away hundreds of times over the last 4 years since we started off Greening and Streaming. It is a live stream. My question I asked myself as I drew that was, how many boxes are plugged in to get a stream from an encoder? There's actually two of them because of redundancy, but an encoder up in layer 4 on the far left, down into the lower layers 1, 2 and 3 where you guys live, through the networks, through the access networks, through the interconnections and the peerings, out into the subscriber networks and beyond, down to that little orange box on the right, which is the set-top box or the decoder that's running in the consumer's device. And the aim was, principally when I drew this art, was to highlight to all the software engineers who work in streaming how many boxes are involved, because a lot of them think, I press play and the rest is magic. And I really did have absolutely no idea that there's physical stuff that gets these bits and bytes from point to point. They don't come necessarily from telecoms. I've worked with live webcasting, and you have to have a full stack integration, a picture of what's going on if you're going to deliver Glastonbury Festival, Royal Wedding, all of the sort of webcasts that I've put together over the years. If it's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong somewhere in there. It's not going to go wrong at one of the ends, typically. So this challenge, or the thing to think about here is, particularly when you look at all the amplifiers which largely run on the bottom, is to think about how many boxes are plugged in when you hear reports that report that all the energy is being used by the set-top box. Okay, now obviously it fans out. Every router is a spreading point. The ground things are a spreading point. So it fans out. There's a lot more of those on the right than there is on the left. But it's quite clear that this set-top box, which is on for 3-4 hours a day and then goes off, and the other kilowatt plant at every single stage down that is sitting on creating an available infrastructure. We were looking at a lot of the reports that were produced about using, as I mentioned earlier in discussion, attributional life cycle assessment, which use data to create a linear correlation between energy and sort of the use of telecoms and how the two relate. There is no relationship between data and energy, and I cannot make this point enough. I've made this hundreds of times. I'm giving it again as a presentation at the ITU Future of TV market, presentation in November. If you turn off the data flow on your cable networks, can anyone here tell me that your energy goes off? It doesn't work like that. Your router is on 24/7, whether you're sending data through that pipe or not. You're modulating ones in a field of zeros, if you like. It's not quite that simple, but to make the point, I'm going to drive it home that way. So we drew this diagram up. We asked the CDNs, Akamai in particular, who have massive coverage, but mainstreaming Broadpeaks and all our other members, to instrument their networks. So point number one, there was no instrumentation. So I don't know where the data before that has come from. So we got them to instrument their networks, and we looked at what happened with their energy flows as we had big spikes in traffic from the World Cup, Conference League football, and Eurovision Song Contest, which is three of the largest spikes you see on internet traffic. Lo and behold, the energy stayed completely flat. It doesn't come and go as your audience does, because it's capacity that drives the demand for energy, not usage. And this misnomer, which is peddled by the big five accountancy firms and forced into an attributional life cycle assessment, has taken the cable and streaming industry down the wrong path, and demonstrably so. Nobody's done the experimental work. So, Green Streaming are doing that experimental work, and it's quite hard work. This is the structure of the organisation. It's not for profit. We have a full-time executive, which is myself and a growing number of other people as the organisation's growing. We have an extensive number of volunteers. We don't have an individual category of membership. We didn't want to manage lots of individuals and change their hearts and minds, because typically they change before they join the organisation. What we wanted to do was re-steer the oil tankers and make sure that we give correct advice to the oil tankers and get them thinking. So we have a lot of individuals who do come to us who are in semi-retirement quite often, or just have expertise from across the industry, who are willing to give time, and they are largely the active members of the organisation. The members turn up and steer the working groups, but it's the volunteers and the core executives, the secretariat, who get things done. We offer ourselves as a bit of an industry voice. You can probably tell from the tone of what I've been delivering today, we tend to take a slightly punk attitude to representing all these blue chip companies. We are engineering focused. We are not going to be beaten down by reports based on made up numbers. We want empirical data coming from our measurements that we can repeatedly predict what's going to happen and do things in the future. It's science, don't you know? I know it's a bit old-fashioned, but it's a really good way to do engineering. So we're focused on best practices and developing best practices. We're not an accreditation body. We're not focused on creating standards, although I will come back to that one in a minute. And we have one overarching core principle, which is no greenwashing. So our members will kick each other if they think that their competing partners are putting out, frankly, lies. And there's no better critic than your direct competitor. So it works really well, and there's actually a strangely open Chatham House type vibe within our working groups. There are 9 active working groups. They're listed on the right hand side. I can go on about all of these for 45 minutes, so I'm just going to skim down them here. Lexicon, outreach and best practice were formed before we started. They seemed like foundational working groups. Lexicon is about understanding the language of sustainability. As streaming engineers, we don't know what carbon is. In fact, we don't really talk about carbon in greening or streaming because nobody knows what it is. We don't know how to affect it. We talk about operational energy, wattage. Members of our organisation do make hardware. They talk about embedded emissions and the fabric churn and so on and so forth. That's great. That's a reasonably well understood art. What's much less well understood is how you can redeploy services in a service-orientated architecture and so on, and how you can do. We're all great at scaling up. Show me a network that knows how to scale down, especially when it's not being used. SDN, NFV, all these technologies, they're all used for scaling up, they're all used for offering redundancy, but once they're scaled up, nobody brings them back down again. They sell the surplus capacity as an SLA or an IRU, and it becomes used capacity, and so you fill up more pipe, and so you build more pipe, and actually there's only a small fraction of the networks that are actually being used. But people don't think properly about it. They want to go along with these kind of wishy-washy attributional models. Then we form, our outreach group is doing exactly this. It's liaising with people, recruiting membership and so on. The best practice group can't produce any best practice yet because we don't have any data, so we can't run any experiments, so we can't make any recommendations, so we don't. We will, and next year we're going to come out with a lot of information because we built our test analysis. So they started off in the engineering working group, so the events and energy measurement really was that around that experiment based on the previous slide, looking at spikes in traffic. It's now doing deeper work and specifically, and this comes to you guys again, reaching into the operators and the telcos to ask how many pieces of kit you've got of different sort of layers in the onion skin. We need to understand what's going on in terms of your infrastructure, the dark art of your capacity. We need to understand that to get a real understanding of whether it's worth working on compression. If it's not making any difference, compression is the wrong space for streaming engineers to work on. We need to look at service orchestration instead, for example. The audio streaming working group's come and gone. Anthony's been running that for a while. You're going to hear from him next. That's interesting. That's turned up work on deduplication. We wouldn't have expected that, but the music library is replicated for every licensee. Not for any technical reason, purely for compliance. It's a 48 kilowatt rack of kit that's duplicated just because you've licensed in Ireland rather than the UK. You don't need multiple audio origins, but they're done purely for licensing. In the same way in Germany, if you pause a live stream and go to catch up, you have to have your own encoded version of that stream, so you end up with a one-to-one relationship between encoders and decoders, purely for license compliance. Surely there are better ways we can do that from an engineering point of view. The compression and decompression working group really should be the steering wheel of the streaming, of greening and streaming, because that's really one place where we sit down, we decide what our packaging strategy is, we decide what our codec strategy is. The problem is, we very early found out, and if you think back to my previous diagram, if you make your 1 kilowatt encoder on the left side of the diagram a half kilowatt encoder and promote it as the greenest thing out there, if you did that in isolation, you might miss the fact that you put 5% work on 30 million set-top boxes. So you've saved half a kilowatt in the core of the system, only to put 15 megawatts on the grid. So without a systemic view, you can't make isolated statements such as we've reduced the bit rate, we've reduced the energy, it's therefore greener. That may not be the case. You have to take a holistic, systemic view. Anything less will lead you into cul-de-sacs. It's quite difficult to reverse out of those cul-de-sacs when you've taken your entire organisation down that path. Working Group 7 has done a reach out to pretty much all of the standards organisations we could get in touch with. I think we spoke to 27 of them last year, lots of help from the Inter-SDO amongst others, asking every standards body out there if anyone has got any energy telemetry standards. DR69? No. IP? No. There are just no standards out there for reading real-time energy data from any infrastructure. I have a quiet hope that SCTE might have some that we haven't discovered because you've been operating your own private networks for a while. You've got slightly less interop challenges. But we've been asking for nearly 2 years and we can't find any energy data. So it is amazing how much data you see published about how much energy we use when even the engineers in the industry can't get any data. And I find that really worrying. So we need to get back to basics and do some proper science. We are putting up as well. I'll come back to that in a second. So the CPE group, you all know what CPE is. Obviously, lots of ADEM reports come out saying it's 80% of the energy used in media streaming is used by the set-top box. Well, that may be true in the moment of streaming, but as soon as you turn those boxes off, their measurement stops, but actually that energy is still running because it's making the service available. So you have to count the available cycles, not just the use cycles. That's critical. So we're getting out there and measuring it. Everyone said it would be difficult. We found a £10 smart meter. We are deploying them at some scale. Ian's been closely involved in sort of helping make sure we do that with as much diligence as possible. We are posting them out, literally posting them out. If you want to get some, please get in touch with me. We're just asking you to plug them into your TV and join us when we do some hackathons live online, get you to point to some test signals. All of the extrapolations that are telling you how much energy is used by the TV and the cable set-top box have been typically done by groups like the DTG and Fraunhofer using 8-month-old boxes and extrapolated to 28 million households. There's a big margin of error for that. So we're trying to get that number up by getting devices out into the home and seeing what people really do with them with real data. Such a funny idea. And then our last group there, Academic Liaison Group, is really a dating agency. There's a lot of academics who are publishing papers based on very finger-in-the-air models. They don't have access to industry data. We're promising them that data as we surface it, and we are wanting them to iterate it into their climate science models, because we're streaming engineers, they're climate scientists. If we give them good data, they might give us good climate science. So it's a reasonably sensible collaboration there. A couple of examples of our work. I mentioned this earlier. Consequence and attribution is central to our thinking. This is in our lexicon working group at the moment. Every model you've seen with any numbers in is an attributional model at the moment, and that means it's an arbitrary 100%, and it's divided up into a sort of pie chart model, and everyone tries to make their bit of the pie chart smaller, which has the effect of making someone else's bit of the pie chart bigger. It doesn't actually make the volume smaller, and the more you focus inside on that internal debate on attribution, the less you focus on the fact that we're buying more and more energy. And so the energy markets are very keen on attributional life cycle assessments because it doesn't affect how much you buy, it just affects how much you point the finger at other people in the supply chain. I mentioned on the other side of it the e-ping protocol. So we are standing up an ICMP protocol to the IETF. It's a draft. We're hoping that people who develop network standards will turn up and show us how it's done, because we don't know what we're doing. We're just making it up as we go along. But basically, this is the ping protocol. If you've ever worked on an IP network and pinged a remote host, you get some latency measurements back. Our e-ping protocol brings back the wattage of the remote host. Simple idea. But again, if we get some data from these points, we can actually start to look operationally at what's going on. So we put that up as a straw man. We hope that somebody who's good at standards is going to come and school us as to how we should have done it properly. But since no one else was getting in the ring and dancing, we thought we'd put our front foot forward. Then just to sort of touch finally, this is our smart meter that we've adopted. These are some real-time data points as we start to calibrate the system and see how it performs and so on. We did some more hackathons yesterday. This particular graph is about as uninteresting as you get. There's I believe that's the encoder energy running along the top. So we have a machine in Bristol University. We sometimes power it up and you'll see the different types of encoding registering different energy. It's quite strange for me, having worked with streaming for a long time, seeing what I'm doing reflected in a graph that looks like a traffic graph, but it's not a traffic graph, it's an energy graph. So turning the brightness up and down on TVs remotely, you can effectively put it, with 10 TVs in a test group, if you go from black to white, you can start consuming the sort of quantities of energy that boiling a kettle does, just by changing a flag in FFmpeg in an encoding piece of software. So it's quite interesting seeing practical real-time feedback on how energy is used in streaming systems, and this is our super basic way of doing it. Over time, we'd hope set-top boxes, TVs and so on will support a protocol like e-ping, so we don't need to post out these little £10 bits of plastic, but in lieu of that, let's get those going. We do have a bunch of other projects running on outside of the core working groups. These are all technically liaison projects with non-members. They are largely grouped into these four projects. Intelligent distribution model shifting is comparing techniques like multicast and unicast to see if that can mitigate capacity planning. It's not quite as simple as deferring infrastructure, because as I mentioned in the Q&A earlier, 2012 could I get my numbers right here? 2012, a 1 terabit optic router would run at about 800 watts. Today, 2022, a 10 terabit router runs at about 400 watts. So if you drive traffic, you can invest in new network kit, which actually consequentially brings your energy demand down. Complicated, especially when you've just spent a lot of time saying to everyone, don't send emails because it's greener. That's a myth. The other one I want to touch on here is the Project 4. I think this is the one that you guys who operate in the physical space with telco will like. We were looking at wind power, renewable power, and where we could best sort of use that within the streaming infrastructure. We discovered that a lot of wind power is curtailed. I don't know if you've met the expression about curtailment. So when Scotland has a very windy 4 a.m. night, they are producing tons and tons of electricity, but they can't get it off onto the grid, and there's just simply no way to use that, so they turn the wind power off. We are trying to capture that curtailed wind power before it's even delivered to the grid on site next to wind turbines, and put high intensity compute, which is non-time critical, into those data centres. Good classic examples: video encoding and AI training. So if you can use wasted renewable energy, you're not taking it away from the grid and hospitals and public health, you're using stuff that simply wouldn't be delivered to the grid. So Scottish Enterprise are really big into that, and we're sort of heading towards building a proof of concept where we'll be doing video transcoding at night in batch processing rather than, and may even be using old recycled computing to do that, because you're no longer in a time critical rush and so on. So it's sort of lit a few fires, that one. So, just in summary, these are some of the achievements, and hopefully motivations for participation. We like to keep sustainability central in discussions in infrastructure planning and so on around streaming. We have our less called projects, which we spoke at 27 events. It's had quite a good reception. We got a lot of feedback. We asked engineers to feedback anonymously to break out of their internal sort of fiefdoms and so on and come up with the best ideas they could. We spend a lot of time correcting misconceptions. That is probably the thing that we're loudest about. I'm not going to read the whole slide to you. I'm sure you're all capable of reading. But we're very active in the space, and we would really like to create more close collaboration with SCTE. I think there's a lot we can share and learn with each other. I think I'm not going to go over the conclusion slides. I think I'm running over time. So, but thank you.
So, welcome everyone. Unfortunately, James couldn't be with us today. He's my co-director at Climate EQ, but I'll run you through everything and hopefully capture out all the questions in the panel as well. So, we'll stop some stats. I'm going to ask something risky, which is to ask people if they agree with these in the room. But overall, 82% of global workers are ready to help with their company's sustainability goals. 88% of employees feel there's too little investment in sustainability training, and 94% of employees believe that training existing employees would help build trust in companies' sustainability commitments. Who agrees with these statements? Should we have some hands up? Not bad. 30 to 40% of the room. And this is part of the reason we have a problem on our hands. And it's within every industry, within every sector, within every set of companies we go into. The reason we started Climate EQ is that James and I met. I was at a Scope 3 measurement company, and we were pitching to global film companies, record labels, all of these organisations who wanted to do something but were mildly terrified about what they were supposed to be doing. They didn't understand the language, they didn't understand the processes, they didn't want to make mistakes. And that's why Climate EQ started. What we looked at was that how do we get people to recognise the importance of sustainability and climate change and linking where the impacts are within your business. So we put together an approach. So Climate EQ is based around music, it's based around equalisation. Subtract before you add. How do you get that mix of music and emotion together? Equilibrium, a balanced view of it. There's so much greenwashing out there. There's so much misinformation that goes on, and each sector doesn't have the same tune or song or lyrics or whatever with it. It has to be sector specific. And overall it's about emotional intelligence. The EQ part of it is how do we actually take all this creativity. We firmly believe that every organisation and every sector has the answers to these questions. You're the people, you're the experts in your industry, but what you have to do is unlock some of the code within measurement, within reduction and within those things. So we've kind of focused within 3 areas which we like to call DEFT, just because we can make a stupid acronym out of it. But basically at the end of the day what we want to do is let people understand that it's about reduction. A reduction doesn't necessarily happen overnight. It might, you can follow 2050, the net zero if you want to. You might be able to reduce overnight and that's amazing. But most people will have to follow a journey. So we put a DEFT approach in together, which is that all of the areas that we focus in are digital, energy, food and transport. And they all interlink. So energy, as John's just been speaking about, has an impact on digital. Energy has an impact on transport. Has an impact on food. Most food needs to be distributed. So we focused in the areas where there's overlap and we can bring experience and knowledge and help people. Overall, the influence, if we look at the UK, digital roughly around 3%, let's see with AI, I'm sure it's going to be 6 to 7. Energy has a large part of that digital footprint, so there's a bit of a correlation there. Food and transport, the other 3. So we want to focus on helping people move, and we do that through concentrating on physical and digital supply chains, particularly. Why do it? So after years with engaging businesses, we've kind of come across an approach, and at the end of the day, it's about simplifying the science and the terminology. We often find that within any company, there's levels of understanding. So almost Climate 101 is just headline level. What are the science? What are the impacts? What's the terminology? What do people need to understand to talk confidently about it? Empowering people is the second bit. So we work with carbon literacy, we're both carbon literacy trainers, and what we do is that we use carbon literacy as the entry level. So if you're not aware, carbon literacy is a charity based in Manchester. Over 100,000 people globally now are carbon literate, and we follow a very simple process to explain the science, the impacts, but we also bring in the so what piece. So once you've understood why we're here, ICE core data, why the IPC was saying the other day that we are breaking through 3 degrees, and what that actually means to us as a society. It's a breakdown society, by the way. It's 2100, but we won't have crops, we'll have vast climate change, and we need to do stuff now to mitigate that. Across the sectors of media tech, we don't see a lot of action, if I'm being brutally honest with you, and it needs to be done in every sector, in every job, in every organisation and every role. Really are getting critical approaches now. But overall, we give you an approach that basically lets you make impactful decisions based on knowledge and training of what's involved with that. So what makes us different? We do a lot with insetting. Now, a lot of people may understand what offsetting is. Insetting is just investing in your own infrastructures to make reductions. So rather than saying, I'll sage all of my gill and I'll go and plant some trees, or I'll go and do something in a peatland. We're not saying don't do that. What we're saying is do that once you've done everything you can to invest in making reductions within your organisation, within your facilities. So we teach insetting as the absolute standard that we go out with. We do a comprehensive approach. We look at digital and physical supply chains. And overall, we use best available data. Now, when you're looking at sector-specific expertise, there's not a lot in digital. We know that. There's great organisations like Greening and Streaming who are gaining engineers to try and get to the data. But there are other things you can do. So if energy is linked with digital, let's look at energy then. If we don't have enough sufficient data to reduce the data part, let's look at all of the other things around that you can impact. Can you get to zero emissions? Can you generate your own data? Can you have a zero emission data centre on site? Should be using servers or cloud-based? All of these things can be analysed whilst that data comes in. Measurable carbon reduction, we do use CO2 in terms of measurement. It's the most common one, but we do work with people who are converting or putting the right level of stuff for digital and physical. And overall, it's about empowerment. If we are going to achieve what we need to achieve, which is going to be really difficult, and if you think at the moment, if you follow net zero, you're basically got to reduce your emissions by 50% by 2030. So if your emissions are 10,000 tonnes, how do you get to 5,000 tonnes in the next 6 years? How do you break that down by department? How do you break that down by what you're doing and how you're doing it? That then goes into something called a net zero plan. Then, how are you going to get to 90% reduction by 2040 or by 2050? So overall, we help organisations understand what it is. And if you think it's going to be a curve, you're wrong. It's like the Alps. And the more you measure, the more those Alps will appear, and the more, that's fine. It's absolutely fine. But overall, as long as you, as an organisation, after a period of time, have got an understanding of what's involved, we've got worst sales pitch in the world, by the way. We say that if we're working with you in 2 years or 3 years' time, we haven't done our job properly. So the idea is for you to focus in on where the emissions are within your business and understand where they are and understand what you need to put in place to make those reductions at the end of it. Who do we work with? We work with everybody across live events, councils. They can have SMEs involved, large digital chemical companies. It doesn't really matter, but what we tend to find is there's 5 carbon hotspots in every business. It might not be the same ones, but there's 5. There's a 5-step approach to looking at where those emissions are and what you need to do. You might not be able to do anything. Your plan might be in 2035 or 2040 that there's enough sufficient accurate data to do something, but then focus in on the ones that you can do now and look at reductions you can. But across music, media, supply chain, live events, all of that sort of thing, we've got a lot of experience in. So what do? We look at carbon literacy training, as I said, as the opener. We do bespoke e-learning training, and the e-learning training part, actually we have now just launched an AI version of James and I, unfortunately, but you're allowed to choose other ones and you can do it. Why have we done AI e-learning and training? It's because you can do it in up to 65 languages. You can change it, you can adapt the content. We write all our own content, so if you want it specific to your industry or your organisation, or you want to change the avatar, you can do that. We thought long and hard about AI, but when we researched it, there's a difference between computational AI and there's a difference between delivering AI as a stream. So if you ask it a question, so you've got a huge impact. We don't know, we feel that the impact of it playing is less, and we think the educational opportunity is far greater. So if you can have it available Southern Hemisphere, we're talking to Carbon Literacy at the moment about our training becoming standard for them and their organisations that they deal with. Then we can make it available in the Southern Hemisphere, subsidised or free. So it's about getting people to understand what the challenges are and how we can do it. If you do or don't know, IMA is the Institute of Environmental Management. We're an IMA training centre and we deliver IMA training, net zero as well. So we incorporate all of that stuff into consultancy. If at the end of it you're going, I don't understand any of this, and I want to do some scope 3 measurement and I want to put a net zero plan together, we can do that for you, or we'll train all your staff how to do it and you can do it themselves. At the end of it, maybe you should have had this slide at the start. So I'm a PIMA, registered environmental practitioner, certified carbon literacy trainer and consultant. Spent many years working for Bertelsmann in the kind of media supply chain, both digitally and physically. Part of the audio working group for greening and streaming, and James and I have both written 5 courses. James, on top of that, has done more stuff within live events and festivals. And I said, if anybody would like to talk to us afterwards, we're hopefully going to continue a conversation with SCTE about putting training available for you via the content we've got. Let's see where that goes. If not, if anybody else wants to talk, we're here to talk to you and embark on the journey. But the biggest thing to say is please don't wait. As an industry, as an organisation, you personally, if you feel you don't know enough about it, we do courses that for individuals, so just join an individual course. If you feel inspired or empowered by that, but please just do something. We're at the point now where we've breached virtually every tipping point in the last 2 years, and whatever your views are on climate change, you know, the science is telling us. We see floods on an almost weekly and daily basis across Europe. Europe is warming at double the speed of any other continent in this planet. So if we don't want all of the infrastructures to fall apart, if we believe that we all want to earn a living and have a nice life, then we all need to start doing something and stop kicking it down the road. And that's organisational level and individually and within your role. So thank you all. Look forward to the chat on the table, and if anybody wants to talk afterwards, we'll speak then. Thank you.
Neal, Dom, Anthony, should we come up the front? They can make it a little bit easier.
I should have just gone straight.
You should have gone straight.
Come on, Rick.
Right, there's one thing we love as engineers, and this is something Dave usually gets annoyed about, and that's TLAs, so 3-letter acronyms. So we're going to start with a quick fire round for all of you. CDP, what's that?
Constant professional development. Shouldn't
No.
say PD.
Carbon Disclosure Project.
Yes.
Oh, come on. SBT.
Sustainable Business Initiative.
No, Science-Based Targets.
SBTI.
No, SBT. They've actually shortened it now. They don't really use the I anymore. LCA.
Life Cycle Assessment.
Ooh. What's greenwashing?
Good question.
Greenwashing is where the original definition of greenwashing was when it wasn't that you lied about your environmental credit, it was that you had something that you said, oh, it's got an environmental benefit, when it didn't necessarily. But originally it wasn't that you were intentionally lying. Now I think you're intentionally lying.
It's a tactic to mislead.
Yeah. CSR?
Corporate
Corporate
sustainable reporting.
Corporate social responsibility.
Responsibility.
ESG?
Environmental social governance.
SDG?
Sustainable development goals.
Oh, it's getting a bit. GHG?
Greenhouse gas.
Oh, it's making
Yes.
What about LEED? LEED?
Oh, I know this.
Leadership in energy and environmental directories. You can see we're getting a lot of the TLAs we used to have problems with years ago. This is starting to feel like a whole new industry.
I think that this speaks to the point where we have our first working group was our lexicon working group. It's precisely to try to demystify the language of sustainability to engineers, which is a bit of a turnaround because most of the time it's the other way around. Engineers are just confusing everyone with TLAs. So.
Engineers go the other way.
I think that's also the question: is that does some of this language and some of these acronyms attempt to obscure or make blurry what should be clear?
Well, for me, it's trying to make it like a tax, VAT. It's something you just have to pay. You don't know really what it is. You just pay it, and it's the same way here. It seems to be trying to hide something.
So I think that this is the heart of the argument around attribution or life cycle assessment. It is creating a little infight so nobody looks at the big problem.
Exactly. So thinking more about this, I mean, you've already done a call to arms today, all three of you. What can we do right now?
Start
what?
So I could give you a nice list of things that the SCTE to do. I'd like an energy telemetry protocol which is remotely pluggable, which is remotely addressable, so that when I make glib statements about how much energy I'm using across an infrastructure, I can look at a graph and see that then energy data represented in real time from some true, well, at least relatively repeatable data sources. And once I'm there, then I can do some A/B testing. And I can say, well, actually, I'm going to try this, and if that measurably shows that I'm using less energy, I'm probably doing the right thing. But at the moment, there isn't any. There's just no data, real data. Your ops team can sit there and look at all your traffic flows, but in your MCR, there isn't an energy bar graph on the wall because you have no telemetry, you have no measurement. So anything you're trying to do with regards to reducing your energy is based on guesswork.
It's worse, a lot of the cabinets are unmetered.
It's endemic. It's just an endemic, and it's fun standing up this year many times on stages with the McKinseys and KPMGs who've got stats coming out of their eyebrows and asking them where they got the data from. They just fall over. They're making it up. And I really worry about that. So if you want to know what to do, please, your engineers, go and make some energy telemetry protocols. Get data flowing so that we can see it in real time. Then we can have a conversation about what to do.
I think another thing, getting back to our theme of people doing stuff together, that here you've got a trade organization, and that as a trade organization, as a body, you've got a lot of people that come from different areas of the industry, and maybe competitors in a lot of cases. But that as a body, you can get things done and agree things at a scale that you can't if your individual company is trying to solve a problem. And that's something that we, that with our things like carbon footprint, you're kind of told you have a disease that you have to cure yourself. So you have this fatal disease, go cure it, and feel guilty about it when you're unable to cure it. And so I think if you have a trade organization, it's these groups of people that can come together and trade ideas, I think that's really powerful. And if like the SCT or any other trade organization says, as a group, this is what we think, this is what we believe, this is what our best practices are, people will take notice of that, and people will go, oh, there's a lot of money over there, and that's represented in that organization. Maybe we should listen to them. So.
We kind of think there's a balance of all of those things, actually, and you can often find that trade organisations slow things down. You can often find that they speed things up. Actually, we teach and talk about individual action and collective action, and collective action should come from the organisation, recognising what everybody's voice is and what everybody's challenge is, and putting that into something cohesive. Actually, some of the most inspiring stuff has come from individual organisations who are quite nimble and have actually gone ahead and done it themselves and are feeding back information to other people. So overall, when I say just start, actually it's getting in the information of what the members' challenges are and what you could do as an organisation to help speed up that sustainability programme. We obviously think it starts with education and training, but it also starts with understanding every acronym and all talking the same language, and that comes through education and training.
Well, for me, that's also part of the education, understanding the language.
And understanding what's relevant. So again, Don's call to action is going to be different because Greening and Streaming focuses in that one bit, and absolutely rightly so. As an organisation, if you want to be net zero, that's one part of the process. So it's absolutely important, it's absolutely where most of the data and the information is, but actually you've got other requirements to do to be net zero that you need to meld all of it together. So it's a balance of all of those.
Are there any questions from out there?
Thank you very much for excellent presentations and a film clip, which was really great, I have to say. Quick question for all of you, but Don in particular. So what you said about networks being usage invariance is certainly something that rings true with me. I was looking at this a few months ago, and I think, no, it can't possibly, it is true, actually. And I've been looking in particular at some of our CPE stuff. Modern CPE chipsets typically come with the ability to ramp up performance and energy consumption. But typically they're left on full whack all the time. It's like having a car with a brake on the accelerator and an on-off switch. What can we do about that? I'm starting to see things moving in the chipset vendors, but I'm not seeing it reflected in end equipment yet. Any thoughts about how we could be more intelligent about how we throttle things up and throttle things down all the way along the chain?
Sure. So I'll start with a sort of general comment and a few sort of specific ideas. So our lesser cord, it stands for Low Energy Sustainable Streaming Cord. Originally that was called the Green Button Project internally, and it was modelling this idea. It makes sense here in the UK because we all have red button services, so the Green Button was kind of it sort of jumps out as being an eco mode idea, Doesn't translate in, well, essentially we got into a whole debate about what would eco mode be, and then we had a sort of more philosophical debate that if we actually had an eco mode, why wouldn't we start in eco mode and have a gold button instead? A sport mode, which makes a lot more sense. When you sit in a sports bar, 10, 17 screens running, all playing high-def sports to a daytime audience of one man and a dog, that's a lot of wasted energy. If that was by default delivered to the optimum of energy efficiency of the screen, and when you have the Saturday night crowd in to watch the game, you have a gold button and you boost it up to as energy inefficient as you might care to get, but you're actually getting value from it, then you're kind of burning the planet with at least some purpose rather than just burning it because that's the default mode of the TV. So we do think the industry should be heading towards a default mode of being sustainable or energy efficient. and offer boosting capabilities, because certainly with internet services, that's potentially an easy thing to do. So you only ramp up the performance on the set-top boxes and so on as you're actually demanding the HDR stream or whatever it may
And
be.
could that be automated? Because I think the key thing, if you're relying on end user behaviour, some will, but many wouldn't. But it can automate.
So we are aware of some metadata standards. They're actually coming more from the production side for organisations that want to get TVs to set themselves into film mode and things like that, that may provide an interface between the software application layer and the physical host hardware devices and so on. At the moment there's no standardisation at that space, so I can't send a message. You know, one of the things we worked on with Ian a lot, at EcoFlow within the IBC Accelerator project was, you know, brightness, TV brightness is definitely the biggest swing variable that you can easily measure in terms of the consumer device. So making your EPG or your homepage default to dark mode notably makes a significant measurable difference in energy consumption. And we're talking in some cases, I would finger in the air guess, maybe 100 watts between them.
Depends on the TV technology, and that's actually the key issue.
Yeah.
Not every energy saving measure would work on every display.
Absolutely.
Required knowledge of the TV display's capabilities, which is not available.
And there's no interrupt between the two layers at the moment. That's why you don't, your Roku control can't turn the TV off. You have to have a TV controller to turn the TV off and so on. And there's no crosstalk yet. That might come off the back of protocols that have been driven by the content people to do film mode. That might create that route in. But at the moment, it's nascent. If anything, there's no way to tell a set-top box or a TV to change its performance. That's a user decision that's separate from the content, if you like, in the delivery.
Do any of you others have comments for Neal?
Sounds good.
The only thing
I'm not a technologist.
No, I'm no engineer either. The only thing I would say again is that when you look at the grid Don shows, and it's about all those networks and all those boxes, our view is not an engineering view. You need to reduce energy across that whole supply chain, that whole digital chain. But if you have zero emissions energy at the end of that, where a facility organisation, theatre, pub has renewable energy and it's on their roof, or it's coming from various sources that they can get grants to implement, if that's put across the chain and you reduce the energy to renewable energy, you can sell that back to the grid. So you absolutely need to do the energy reduction. But from an engineering point of view, from a TV point of view, from a scope 4 and all of that type of thing, brilliant, carry on with all that stuff. Still doesn't mean you can't reduce energy in other ways. And actually, it's how do you reduce your operational and your organisational energy alongside what these great, brilliant minds are trying to do from an engineering perspective. We don't see it as one single solution solves all, and that's actually sustainability. Sustainability isn't about one fix. It's about going, well, where are the carbon hotspots? Where are all the emissions in that digital workflow? Where is it in our building? Where is it in the people who are using it? How do we help everybody reduce it? And that's one of the things that comes into carbon footprint and carbon handprint. We teach carbon handprint, which is about your influence in that whole value chain as well. So it's the sum of all of the parts.
Well, actually, I mean, it was some sort of smug thing to say, but I think that the brilliance there of just being able to have a gold mode rather than eco mode is really important, and that idea of how you communicate this or create a way of understanding that people can engage with kind of at a mass level, and that's, if we could get the whole TV watching population to sort of shift their habits just a little bit, that's a huge amount of savings. And so much of this, you're being bombarded all the time with people trying to change your behavior. And every time you look at your phone, you're being manipulated into a specific kind of behavior change. You're scrolling, or you're whatever. There's stuff happening to you all the time. So how you change interfaces and how you change that content story of like how I engage with my content, what my content means to me, how my content intersects my day. That idea of storytelling not just being the content that you look at on your screen, but that storytelling is the whole environment around how you experience and engage with your content. I think that's an important kind of, a type of social engineering, if you want to put it that way, but a type of experience management that has a huge impact on sustainability. It's not just the technology, it's the whole experience you're creating around the technology.
Absolutely, it's a really important point that this is part of the education and training bit. We say this again. If you knew that, if you watch something in standard definition or high def or whatever, and you're given that choice or the golden button, great. If you knew that every time somebody sent you a picture, it's stored on one part of your phone, you've got to delete it, otherwise you're paying for more storage capacity. If you knew that you downloaded music, it has a fraction of the battery use, it has a fraction of the energy used to stream rather than download. All of these things are educational pieces that we all need. The same is off the cloud and in the cloud. We have a responsibility for what we put up there and we store. And reports say it's about 50%. 50% of what we put up there is absolute rubbish. We don't need. So actually, everybody in every organisation, personally, has a responsibility to do digital spring cleans, to do all of the things that have an emission associated with it. But most people don't understand the difference, and they're not told. So you're not told if you go on Prime Video that it's HD only. Nobody tells you that you can have SD. SD and HD are the same price. So everybody buys the HD version, don't they? So it's absolutely right. It's key critical, that message.
You're going to play devil's advocate a little bit here, and something that I found very frustrating. I'm thinking back to the EcoFlow project. Actually, there was a number of the major broadcasters who were involved in that project, and there was a desperation to create something that they could talk to the consumer about. It was absolutely the only thing that really mattered was, have we got a story that we can tell the consumer? This is how they can participate, this is how they can reduce their impact. And the more we worked together, the more they got disappointed that we were turning up numbers which proved that all the stories they wanted to get the consumer involved with were really founded in nothing. They were just fantasies, and it got more and more frustrating for the major broadcasters because they wanted to go out and say, oh, you can press this button on your EPG and save the planet, and they want to create that circularity. And I find it extremely frustrating because there's so much. I mean, I would have thought 70% of the IBC EcoFlow dialogue was about that. Less than 30% was about, actually, the numbers we're getting, right. Are they repeatable? Do they mean anything? And that's the consequential life cycle assessment. That's the side of the story where we need to be empirical. There's this old adage that don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And a lot of sustainability organisations work with that. Greening and streaming purposefully does not. We absolutely believe that somebody somewhere needs to do the science and do it perfectly. Otherwise, we are just going to go waltzing off in a fantasy and then wake up and find we're already past the apocalypse. So I agree that a degree of circularity and social engineering is important for assuaging your guilt with the fact that you affect the environment, but I don't agree that it actually makes a difference. I actually think that what makes a difference is giving engineers resources to make changes. If you make a more efficient boat, it will be more efficient whatever you put on it. At the moment, we just spend so much time arguing about who's getting on the boat, wearing what, carrying what, and it's not making a difference to the shipping line. And we need to get back to that fundamental engineering basic and do the consequential life cycle. And I won't shut up about it because it is the most important thing we need to do.
But just
to convince me, give me my dollar back.
But just to talk on the positive side for EcoFlow,
yeah.
just apart from the discussions, things were got an outcome. The understanding that the default mode needed to be an eco mode,
Yeah.
but it didn't need to be the highest eco mode, because the other key issue about sustainability is it's not just energy saving, it's about effective use of energy.
Yeah.
There's reasons why energy usage of television displays, routers, networks, etc. are the way they are. The aim is we've got to make them more efficient while still doing their functionality, and to make them more effective. And that's an important point, because we still want the basic function to be done. It's just there's ways forward. In fact, most of the discussions that take place on an EU regulator level is not about not doing things. It's about driving the industry to make better engineering solutions to provide what consumers want. Because the simple way of providing a very low energy solution is to do nothing and not turn it on.
Just on that point, totally agreed on, but there's also how long does that take sometimes?
So consequential takes years, and
Yeah.
it's not very sexy until the engineers have done the work.
So then there's, if you set the training and the education that this is what perfect looks like, we haven't got perfect yet, so this is the best available we can, you can not only train people in that time what they should be doing and how they should be doing it, use whatever data you can do to learn where the other hotspots are that you can do something about, but always have the eye that this is just fluid. It's not perfect, but it's better than avoidance and doing nothing. And there's too much avoidance.
If we were the only group active in sustainability and only working for perfection, that would be also wrong.
Yeah.
You need to have both, but we lose sight of the effort to do the perfect consequential analysis because it's hard work. And it's nice and easy to go and stand on platforms and say, oh, we made a number up and we halved it over 2 years and called ourselves net zero, and everyone gets a bonus and a pat on the back, but nothing's done. We need to get back to that basis.
But is there also like being able to sort of make that, that's our job, I guess, at the Flint, is to try to make that more transparent to users and consumers who, like, I mean, if get two people arguing about a smartphone and they'll be like, no, this is my phone does this because your phone is crap, and mine, they'll get into the minutia of tech. People love to geek out on that stuff. Regular people love to geek out on that stuff. So if you can like expose some of those things to public conversation, I guess in a way that again people have that language that they can talk about it, does that help move things forward?
The problem is it gets turned into how many times you drive to Saturn and back while watching Netflix and things. So that's just.
but you want to get it.
It makes people feel guilty about using a device, and actually moving that guilt around doesn't have any environmental impact whatsoever.
The guilt.
But if people are like my TV set brand X is bullshit, then and that brand becomes toxic. I'm just using it as an example. Then that will.
But
that help the force change?
We can't brand that brand X TV as toxic without measuring it.
Yeah,
You can't just say, oh, you've got that brand, I don't like that brand, it's bad.
Yeah.
Which is what's happening today.
But this is where we need to get some more evidence-based.
Exactly.
This is the biggest problem we've had. Any research at the moment is being challenged. And this is going back through all of the research that's been done over the last 100 years.
Yeah.
Everybody's looking at the research and saying, is it actually true?
Yeah.
Can we do this research once more?
Yeah.
Can we take 100 people and ask them?
Where is repeatability?
It's the repeatability that's missing at the moment. So people are coming out, as you say, we've saved 50%. Well done. On what?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
But we've saved it. We're saving the planet.
Yeah, Microsoft's going to be net zero by last year, and it's just made the largest
Last year,
energy
minus
commit
10.
ever.
Yeah.
It's just, it's.
But that is greenwashing.
And they are no longer welcome to be green industry.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, but there's also a huge.
We've got one from Georgia first.
Okay.
So if we talk about this issue of engineers and companies being greener, but fundamentally the consumer doesn't want to be greener. If you look at my telly, I've got an Ultra HD telly. When I rent a film off Amazon, I can rent it in SD, HD or UHD. I pay more to rent it in UHD. If you look at cars, you could argue the fact that why does Mercedes need to go 150 miles an hour? It doesn't. Why don't you cap it at 70? Because BMW won't cap it at 70, so I'm not going to buy a Mercedes, I'm going to buy a BMW because it's not capped. So it's good having a conversation around what do companies do. The companies need to stop making the consumer, like we said about broadband earlier. I had Sky at my old address, and for less money, cable broadband came around and went, you can have 900 megabytes rather than 150. I never had an issue with 150, but it was like, yeah, cool, give me the 900. And it's all driven by the consumer, and I think that's where it needs to change first. Look at the seatbelt scenario with Volvo, and it was like, no one wanted a seatbelt, but it got put in, everyone had to make do with it. So maybe that's just what we have to do, is go back to saying, right, actually, all you can have is this. You can only have HD, you can only have, maybe not SD, but bring it down. Stop giving the option to consumer, and then once consumers taken out of the equation, then companies can start focusing, well, how do we meet that level? Because at the moment, it's just...
So I think the internet's the streaming world is slightly different from the cable world, in as much as you can deliver a personalised service to every user. So you don't have to go out and mandate everyone has to have UHD or everyone has to have a particular protocol. You can set your baseline on an arbitrary basis and even on a personalised basis rather than on a blanket level. So I think that makes the industry slightly different. The OTT industry is usually cost focused, and cost has been why data has been given an equivalence to energy, because KPMG could just add a column. If you convert dollars to gigabytes, and then you can convert gigabytes to carbon, job done. There's your ESG report. That's how it's worked. That's what net zero is, and that's it. There's no more to it.
There's also that and again, which I mentioned at the top, when I was at BAFTA, we discussed this idea of the glamour problem, and the idea of, say, going to the Academy Awards or big events like that, music awards. Everybody flies in. It's excessive. It's supposed to be excessive. I want to see excess, and I want to dream about what it's like to have that excess, and it's this. That I don't think is necessarily natural. I think it gets back to one of those myths that we were talking about. We sort of assume that that's everybody's aspiration, that, everybody wants more and more and more and more, right? That's just what we want. It may be, I don't know, but it may be that we've been trained that way to a certain extent. That may not be inbuilt. So the fact that, you want to have the next thing or the biggest thing, or you have to have this next glamorous thing, may be a result of training. And there's also a way to make that kind of creepy and horrible. So the idea that you have the look at my new cool car that is, this gets crap gas mileage and goes a million miles an hour or whatever. The idea that rather than glamorous, that's a creepy thing to do, is something that I think can be more normalized. So those things that which make perfect sense, for my dad literally was born in a house with a dirt floor. So the idea of eating lots of steaks and having that cool gigantic car makes perfect sense if you came out of that, But I think that can be deglamorized and reframed in a different way, that it shouldn't have the same cachet that it had, a generation ago.
Can I just maybe add some things about the analogy used there? The thing with the car is you know how many miles per gallon it has. You know that. You can, if you wish, moderate your driving to make most effective use of the fuel. You don't have that information currently about your television. In fact, pretty much everybody in this room is not aware that actually, in terms of continuous energy consumption, a television is one of the higher energy consumers in your house, especially because you use it on average 4.5 hours every single day. And that is not dependent upon the bit rate or the resolution of the content. It's just a big slab of glass with light behind it that basically uses energy. It's just how bright it is, how bright it isn't. And sometimes it's not even how bright it really is for a lot of the televisions we buy. In fact, most people in this room have bought a television that's one of the most energy using, most inefficient and ineffective technology as possible. Because if you buy an LED TV, it's a device that is based on generating light and then throwing it away to make the picture. That goes back to what's required by us engineers. We're supposed to make better engineering solutions. That includes sustainability from the start.
Yeah.
Can I just add a point to the point the gentleman made about the car? Anybody here know Edward Bernays? Anybody know the name? Anybody remember it? It's Sigmund Freud's nephew. He was the godfather of modern PR. If you track climate change, it started in 1950s America with Mad Men, where we were all sold all of the things that you've just talked about. So when you're talking about systemic change, do we need it? Yes. Does everybody know it yet? No. And is it going to function at every level? Yes. And that comes around education and training. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we are forced and working around a world of convenience at the moment, where sustainability and climate change is a byproduct of us trying to lead these lives, which do need to be reframed slightly.
One of the things, when I started looking through this, one of my kids came up, why are you going to a lecture? Everything's on ChatGPT. Why do you need to go to a lecture to find out this information? So, well, everything's not on ChatGPT. But AI, machine learning, will this actually help us in this sustainable world? And will it be worthwhile?
I still can't figure out what AI is for a lot of the time. I mean, I'm sure it does. It's amazing things if I'm doing genetics, or trying to do some physics stuff, but I still can't quite accept that I can do a weirder Google search.
So I did my degree in AI in the 90s.
Now what do you know about it?
What I do know about AI is that the term has been completely bastardised in the last 2 years, and it now means what IT used to mean.
Yes.
I don't get that. I just really struggle to get that. Narrow AI is essentially creating tensors between matrices. That's what it does. It does statistical analysis and maps data sets together and infers data from it. That's what it does. That's not a general AI, that's not Skynet. It's really sexy seeing what GPTs are doing and so on and so forth, but it's just IT. It's just IT. So will IT be helping us solve the problems of IT? Probably.
Yes.
But in terms of, also, I think in terms of, I worry about the unicorns' use of AI. Microsoft just bought $75 billion of energy commits. You cannot buy energy in Western Europe because Microsoft's already bought it all. You can't put renewable energy into a hospital because it's already booked to go into a Microsoft AI data center, and they're promoting a net zero strategy. That's it. That's what I'd say about AI now. I don't know whether they're going to need those data centers. I should imagine AI will produce a lot of data for other AIs to read, and it'll just go into a circularity of pointlessness.
Which is, if you're a fossil fuel company, you would
Which is great.
You're a big fan of AI.
It's great, absolutely.
You like
Absolutely.
Neal, sitting in the media, you have to look at sustainability awareness and try and promote this in another way. Is there ways of making, to coin a phrase, this more sexy?
Yeah, I think there's a positive and the negative. There's the I think making things really crystal clear about how bad things are and the danger we're in. And I rarely hear, virtually no one in the conversations I've had appears to have the sense of alarm that I would have expected from people, which it gets back to that idea of milling. When there's a disaster, we sort of mill and kind of go, I don't know, he doesn't look worried, I won't look worried unless he looks worried. So I think that's one side of it, is to try to really make clear to people how, that it's a fire alarm, and it's an emergency. But then the flip side of that too, I think, is this opportunity you have to reinvent the future. And I think it's like, everything is up in the air, everything is up for grabs. The world is going to be changing very radically, whether you want it to or not. And the future is going to be very, very different, whether you want it to be or not. And so it's like, well, what do you want it to look like? And that's something that we talk a lot about at the Flint, is this kind of, how do you build the future that you want to live in? And Neal Hammond is going to bring up that.
I just wanted to put a mic.
But how do you, what future, what's the future that you want, and how do you create that future?
Yeah, I think just to follow on from that point, and sexy wouldn't be the
Our publisher, Neal Hammond.
This is going to go horribly wrong, but Neal's absolutely right. What it does is engage a much more diverse cohort of people, and I don't mean anything like that looking around here, but it really does engage a generational thing, and the change really is not going to come from a lot of old blokes like us, really. We're just providing a platform to amplify that conversation. Mm-hmm. What is inspiring, in my experience, is seeing a younger, more diverse crowd coming in and really having the confidence to drive that conversation through their own companies and organisations, and even be the generators of it there, which is then hopefully picked up by management level and whatever. That's what I mean.
And there's also on that younger, sort of younger people seem to have a more sense of how a lot of these different angles are interconnected, so that, as was actually discussed in one of the earlier sessions, how work and the way you work and the type of job you have and the income you have has a real effect on sustainability. So I'm from the US, I've lived here for 18 years, but in the US, if I'm worried about my medical bills, which I probably am all the time, the earth burning is a bummer, but I can't figure out how to pay my bills for this month because I have medical bills, and that's where my future horizon ends, and I can't see beyond that because that's a really serious problem I've got to solve. So job insecurity, a lack of social safety net impacts directly on sustainability and how your employer treats you, and the kind of that how you have what happens in the workplace affects directly how you're able to engage with these other issues. So I think that's getting that sort of holistic view, which I think a lot of younger people coming in will sort of see that more holistic view is key.
I remember having a conversation with Neal last year actually about an idea to run a competition in various different organisations to kind of find the youngest member of the team and give them a budget, a proper budget, not hundreds of thousands, but a proper budget, and actually say to them, okay, see what you could do. Let's run a competition amongst the youngest people in the organisation. They tend to be less trapped by the fiefdoms and the structures of power, are much more courageous in going, actually what we really need to do is stop using single-use plastic bottles, stop travelling to work unnecessarily, and just state the stupid and obvious. Where those who've been running businesses for a while are just so entrenched in the routine of how it is that they can't even see that you could change the status quo and it'd still be identifiably what they associate as being work. So I think all power to the younger generations, because they're coming through with this stuff baked in.
Yeah, I was just going to make the same point that very erudite gentleman made, that this is going to be solved by our children. Sadly, the men and women in this room, our careers are largely spent, and the children, mostly Anthony's children, are going to be running all of these networks and making the decisions about how they're going to be spending their money and living their lives. And so we have to do all of this work and educate them and hand them the keys, because it's already happening, whether we like it or not.
There was when I first started Greening and Streaming, there were quite a lot of organisations, especially in the ISP space and the data centre space, who said, well, we're just going to carry on doing what we're doing and wait for the power to go fully renewable. And that has been the attitude, and that still is a persistent attitude. It reminds me, I don't know if you know an engineer called Joe Armstrong. He was one of Ericsson's sort of most bright engineers ever. Was father of a programming language called Erlang. He used to. He had a story that said, if you want to write a fast computer program, what you need to do is write a slow one and wait. And unfortunately, this is the same strategy that's adopted with sustainability, often within telcos and conducted sort of environments, is, well, we'll just wait until the input energy solves that problem. Well, yeah, but we've also got a responsibility to try to be more efficient so that we can make more of that renewable energy for hospitals and for public health and for farming and for whatever it may be. And we shouldn't be hogging it just because we want the latest cat video made by an AI, which is essentially where we've got to.
That's where we've got to now. Looking at education, so Anthony, this is one for you. You want this future to happen. When future happens, what's going to happen? So what's going to happen in the next 5 years? If you get what you want, everybody gets educated. What's going to happen?
I think the answer to that, if I knew the answer to that, actually, by the way, I'd be a very rich man. Be sat here. The first Model T Ford was, go back to the car analogy, we don't drive around in Model T Fords, do we? Sustainability is fluid, it's new, it's something that should have been acted on 10, 20 years ago, it hasn't been. Whether people use GHG protocols or follow net zero, which by the way, net zero is a legal framework in the UK, by the way, so even if you believe in it or you don't believe in it, there is legislation that's in place. It says you have to report, and that's set at 36 million at the moment. If you're doing sector reporting, it will reduce in the next 5 years. So what we say to people is that as long as you're educated in a balanced way, and you take Dom's point, couldn't agree more with Dom, with all agreeing extremely, but that's not always available. So if you look at, I'll give an example actually, there's not too many digital examples to give unfortunately, but if you look at, we do a food company, they've got 2,500 products. There's 2,500 products that are getting mapped with the GHG emission factor per kilo. It's not perfect, but the idea is it's transition. The idea is that you do your scope 1 and 2, pretty easy. What's your direct costs, what's your organisational costs, what's your energy, what's your employee commute, all of those things, the data will help you make decisions to reduce those. Where the fog is in the scope 3.
Scope 3.
But we'll map 2,500 products for those. Will they be measuring those next year or the year after? No, we're asking all the suppliers to get LCAs done, to get everything done to do it. Does that have cost? Yes. Does it have money? Are those LCAs accurate? Don't know, but that's available at the moment. So if at the end of it you get to a point where you go, I've got 20,000 tonnes CO2, it's following protocols, it's following science, it's following something that allows you to put a marker in to reduce. Is it perfect? No. And should it be the end goal? Absolutely no. But certainly it means that you're teaching and educating everybody what good does look like and what perfect looks like and how do you get to perfect. And at every level and across every sector, it's about the person who's producing actually giving you something that has a measurement that means you don't have to rely on EcoInvent or Gabi or all these worldwide databases that are average to hell, but at least it's a starting point. And I'm conflicted with some of this, but my argument is everybody has to start training and doing something, and you have to start reducing. And if it changes in 5 years, so be it. In between now and then, we're going to use the best available data. We're going to try and make people reduce by 50% by 2030 and 90% by 2050. And hopefully in between, perfect will appear, where everybody can do that. Hopefully it's less than 5 years, but it could be 10.
Right. One for you. The future, will you be able to get all of those streaming boxes to work together? And not just throw things from one end to the other?
Sorry, you mean the boxes on my diagram or the CPU? Given the layered nature of the internet, I think it's probably unlikely that we'll get full stack interop between, say, the people who are digging ducts won't necessarily be able to detect how much energy the Netflix application is using. I think that degree of integration of interop is unlikely. I think you'll probably get it by the layer, so you'll be able to read across layer 4 in the application space. You'll be able to see more or less what's going on in the infrastructure. It becomes sort of corporately political in the lower layers. When you start trying to imagine two peered networks, I don't know, whatever the old cable and wireless network is these days, Virgin is it? So you've got Virgin and BT's networks across their peerings and so on. I doubt the two of them are going to allow each other to look in glass inside at each other's energy and so on. So that's complex, and that tradition of being secretive about your capacity is the biggest enemy in the lower networks. We know that energy is determined by capacity. We also know that no telco or cable company anywhere on earth is ever going to say, I've got this much unused capacity, because the moment they do, their prices will tank. It's just supply and demand, But that's the key bit of information we need. So we're hidden behind that. The only thing that could break through that would be regulation. I think if there was a regulatory move to push before that, I think a much simpler one is to get every company of every type to publish its kilowatt-hour purchases and its fuel bills, every annual fuel bills, as a broken-out item in their quarterly and annual returns. Not to compare with each other, but to compare with themselves over time. To increase your profit while reducing your electricity bill. That's what the analysts want to be looking at.
That regulation is something we haven't really talked about.
No.
Which is.
But the other point that was made there is also, they all know that there's cost saving available here. The decisions aren't based on if it's going to cost less. The misnomer of sustainability or being green is going to cost more. Not always the case. And if you get operational efficiencies in place and if you get kind of optimization in place, but most of the people buying these big contracts already know. They already know they can save money. They're just still not doing it.
So so talking about regulation, that I was talking to an analyst recently who just made the point that you can talk about sustainability all you like, but unless there's regulation, it's going to be kind of this voluntary thing. Yeah. He said, of course, once there's even the threat of regulation, suddenly that place where there was no money, sorry, we have no money, suddenly a bunch of money shows up.
Yep.
And so there's that. It's not really about the money, it's about what the amount of pressure is being put on.
It's the amount of pressure that's needed to get that regulation. But without the metrics, it's getting more difficult to actually put regulation in place. Yeah. I mean, they're saying save 50, save 90.
For what? Yeah, exactly.
I think we're coming to the end. Are there any more questions? We're actually eating into our networking time now.
Yeah, I've got one. Martin Lee. You're obviously, you're obviously championing the work that's being done, and it's good work, no doubt. What I would say is, though, do you not think the reason for the lack of traction in this country, Europe, maybe America, and West generally, is what's going on in the East, the Far East, where the emissions are continuing to rise incredibly, and no effective measures are being taken there?
Is this a question for me or somebody else? You were kind of looking at me when you said it, so I think it's...
I guess it's you too, really.
So my answer to that question is around historical and present. If you look at China, if you want to pick on China as the Far East, really emissions from the 1980s. So we've emitted more in the UK and Europe than China have since the 1980s. Globally, China has become the manufacturing workshop of the world and is producing huge amounts of emissions. Yes, that's without doubt. They're also reducing their emissions at a more rapid rate than anybody else. Do I worry about hotter parts of the country getting aircon? Certainly. Do I worry that we need to have transitions in other areas? But personally, we have to forget about the rest of the world. If you look at our total emissions out of the UK versus the rest of the world, we're here to lead by example. And ultimately, at the end of the day, since the 1800s, we've put most of the pollution in the world, and we've been a contributor to some of the largest emissions in the world. Southern Hemisphere countries have done nothing towards this, and they're actually being impacted the most. But overall, if we need to do anything, we can do it via procurement policies, how we procure, where we procure from. If you look at renewables, let's take renewable as an example. Nearly every car battery, nearly every photovoltaic raid on a solar roof, nearly every wind turbine is all being made in China at the moment. The lithium is being mined all over the world, it's all being processed in China. So much so, the Americans brought out 530 clean bill last year, that if Trump gets in, he's going to get rid of it. So all of the things that China are doing, you could argue they're leading by example, actually. If they stop producing and selling to the rest of the world, they're just going to put the infrastructure into their own country. There'll be zero emission shipping, there'll be zero emissions factories, they've already got the power network in the ground. So the Far East thing for me is it's a good point, but historically we all need to know that actually we're as much of a problem as China is, and India. India, largely mobile, isn't it, in terms of its infrastructure, in terms of delivery of fibre and all of that type of thing. India is an emerging economy just like Africa. But our role is to be the people that lead and to show other people what to do. And if again, we're looking at, we don't know what to measure, there's protocols in place. There's GHG protocols, there's measurement protocols in place that all the world are trying to follow. What we don't need to do is let Accenture and the 5 big go, just use spend and purchase data. What you need to do is get into your scope 3, find the emissions within all of your operations, try to put a measurement figure on there that's as good as possible, and then work towards getting perfect over the next 5 years. China will have more renewable in place in the next 5 to 10 years than probably the rest of the world. Following COP, actually what happened is everybody signed up to double their renewable, and actually there's still India, India, America, Europe, South America are still less than China's output at the moment. So Far East is important, but we shouldn't say it doesn't matter what we do. We should just say let's just do it.
I wouldn't say that. It's obviously beneficial to organisations to cut their energy consumption.
Yeah, 100%.
But if you're looking for apathy, I think that's probably the cause of apathy. That's probably where it comes from.
Yeah.
Can I just add though, we can't assume a lot, because the nature of energy consumption and the type of energy consumption is not always the full picture. If you look at just pure stats, China is way below most. It's like 34th in the world for energy consumption per capita. If you take the view that you should measure it that way.
That's
per capita. If you want to measure it based on output of industry, that will get you a different answer.
Yeah. But that was part of the convenience thing, right? We rushed to buy things cheaper, quicker, better, and we've created the beast as well.
Well, it's still not the countries we just referred to as being bad, so to speak, are way down the list of energy consumers.
Yeah.
We're doing that special on the Nordics coming up, and we discovered not discovered, but the Nordics, we're all green. It's green power. They're all fabulous. Per capita, their emissions are they're the highest in Europe. For a number of reasons, but because they tend to be very wealthy, so they consume a lot.
Well, we as engineers need to look at all the data, make sure it's correct data, and then understand what the data is. I'm a big one on this with Dom. I don't want to know just the what and how, it's the why that's really important.
There's a great book, it's a little bit off tangent this one, but there's a great book called Volt by the former minerals editor for the Financial Times. She looks at the car battery in particular and the sort of evolution of the car battery in the electric vehicle. I won't go into the whole battery lithium thing, it's a fairly obvious story to go and explore it. It's a really interesting book. But the really salient takeaway was towards the end of the story, or the end of the book, he moved to focus on what's currently happening in China with their development of electric vehicles, and highlighted a massive difference between the West and China. Because, this is a little bit of assumption on his behalf, but because the smogs in Beijing in particular were in living memory, people are very much more connected with why they should be driving electric vehicles than we are here. So when they buy electric vehicles in China, they're buying what we would identify as a Citroën Ami over here. So they're tiny, tiny little, almost disposable cars, about £3,000, $3,000. Very, very lightweight, very efficient to run, very small battery and so on, because they are using very limited resources. Whereas over here, it's become a virtue signalling model where you have to have a 2-ton electric vehicle which spews microplastics off its tyres, which has a Wagyu beef interior and a mother of pearl inlaid dashboard.
Yes.
And this is the whole fundamental problem of this attribution and consequence. We aren't thinking about the real consequence. We just want a little green stripe on a number plate.
Chestnut, please.
Yeah. Chestnut. Burberry car, is it here?
Neal, Dom, Anthony, and the audience, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Time to go upstairs.